You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, Internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Attention business owners and independent contractors. This is a money-saving message from Tax Mediation Services. If your business owes $20,000 or more in taxes, we can help you today, right now. Listen, dealing with the IRS is no picnic. It's an intimidating and extremely stressful process, and you don't want to go it alone. Our attorneys know every law, every tax break, and every possible opportunity to help you resolve and reduce your tax debt. And if you owe more than $20,000, you may be at the top of their hit list. So don't take your tax debt lightly, because it will not go away on its own. The IRS can seize your bank accounts, your home, and even shut down your business. Call our tax experts today at 1-800-783-0810 and let us deal with the IRS while you focus on your business. That's 1-800-783-0810. Again, that's 800-783-0810.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq, Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now, 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It's takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
This is Dawn on the Air. It's a look at today's news and social commentary from an eyes-wide-open perspective. It's up to us to ensure the issues of today are decided by us, not for us, because no one will give us liberty. We must claim it for ourselves. Wow. You know, I shouldn't allow myself to be so surprised by the ignorance or hypocrisy out there. Every once in a while, though, it just creeps up on me. Yeah, it's Monday, so I'm probably talking about the kneelers, which, we'll get to again later on, but the same people who complain about leftist feels are often the same people who are up in arms over their own feelings. Listen carefully. You cannot use the force of government to make people stand for a flag. No, not in my America. Oh, and hi, I'm Don Weston, and this is Dawn on the Air. It's amazing to me how angry people get about whether someone stands for a flag, but where's this level of outrage when people do something a little more significant, like actually burning the flag? I hear people calling for legislation to force people to stand, but where's the legislation preventing the burning of the flag? If people want to embrace the silly concept of hate speech, well then fine. But I'm pretty sure that no one burns the flag out of love. And whatever, we'll get back to this in a bit. I'm packed tonight with a couple of other things I wanted to discuss, so let's get to it. President Trump, he's becoming adept at sending me scrambling over the weekend. Again, I'm not a big fan of clinging to the imaginary news cycle, but still, few people seem to be discussing the latest mention of resuscitating more government overreach. The Fairness Doctrine. Now, this was a policy first introduced in 1949 by another department of governmental overreach, the FCC. I recorded a Federalist moment about the FCC some time ago. Maybe I'll see if I can dig it up and maybe play it after this. But the FCC introduced the Fairness Doctrine, which required broadcasters to present issues of public importance in a way that was considered balanced. Now, this insidious practice was repealed in 1987 by an FCC chair who was an aide to Ronald Reagan. Now, the problems with the Fairness Doctrine were many, not the least of which was the obvious First Amendment violation. I don't need to go any further than that, do I? Creating public policy that violates the supreme law of the land should have been enough, right? It should still be enough. But President Trump tweeted out a curious statement in response to the late-night talk show hosts, in their ridicule of recent Republican efforts to do, well, anything. It reads, "More and more people are suggesting..." I'm sorry. I'm so terribly sorry. I don't have a good Trump voice. I kind of sound more like Reagan after taking a drag from one of Obama's special cigarettes. So I'll try this again. Trump's tweet reads, "More and more people are suggesting that Republicans, and me, should be given equal time on TV when you look at the one-sided coverage." He entered a statement with a question mark. That's kind of fun, but it's cute, right? He ran as a Republican, claimed to be a Republican, and won as a Republican. But now he loves to point out how he's not a Republican. You gotta love when people misrepresent themselves or their beliefs for personal or political gain. Yeah, I mentioned this recently in regard to a current political candidate that most of my friends support. I did too at one point, but for me, when I run under the description of eyes wide open, it's not just a phrase. It's a mission statement. At any rate, I'm not one of those people who look at Trump's tweets as if they are public policy decrees. I do, however, take them as warnings of things that may be coming. I mean, he's already mentioned more than once the possibility of trying to curtail the First Amendment and specifically the freedom of the press. Now, I know it's a dicey subject, but you have to know that there is one, and only one way, to do that legally, through the official amendment process. My concern is that, our federal government, notice how I didn't lay it all on Trump? Yeah, that's because he's far from the only one in government who would like to control the First Amendment. So my concern is that the federal government will pull its usual tricks, like labeling a situation an epidemic or a crisis in order to justify instant action, like more illegal laws or executive orders, or having a second or third tier government agency create a policy, rule, or regulation to restrict certain aspects of the subject, and then letting that agency take the fall for any backlash. And of course, if there's no backlash, then the government can come right on out with it. I mean, this is how the government handled the revitalization of civil asset forfeiture. The populace should be up in arms about that, but instead, they take a knee. Well, guess what? They'll probably take a knee for the Fairness Doctrine when the government brings it back. If the people who bring it back happen to be on your side. I guess we'll wait and see, but that's why these arbitrary sides are ridiculous, You guys are being played. You're all just being played. Now, you might want to worry a little less about what overpaid, overhyped, pretty little princesses kneel for, and instead consider what actual constitutional violations you take a knee for. Because I promise you, those are far more consequential. Oh well, I do find it odd that someone who clings so hard to the free market wants to remove the free market because people aren't always nice to him. Now, no, I'm not a fan of our president, nor am I his enemy. In fact, my feelings about Donald Trump are wholly irrelevant when it comes to our Constitution. Trump, he is not a private citizen anymore. He's part of the government. That means his actions are now limited by the Constitution. My feels, they make me wish someone could get that through his head, but the logical side of me reminds me, if he realized just how limited he is by the Constitution, he'd probably stop ignoring it and start abolishing it. Hey, don't look at me like that. I also find it odd how a guy like me is more interested in supporting and defending the Constitution than the average politician who, actually swore an oath to do just that. Support and defend the Constitution. Anyway, I'll get more into the Fairness Doctrine if there appears to be any real movement on it. I mean, right now it's just more noise from our tweeter-in-chief, which makes me wonder if this is more sleight of hand on the part of our government. Now, I guess we'll find out shortly. In the meantime, I've got a few more things to get into this evening. There's a somewhat controversial issue that now involves my youngest son and another one that involves my eldest son, and both issues have constitutional elements at play. But I don't know. We'll see how it goes when Don on the Air returns in just a moment. This is a Federalist Moment with Don Weston, brought to you by the Federalist Coalition. People have been losing their minds over the FCC opening a standard investigation spawned by formal complaints into some bawdy comments made on television about the president. These folks have been crying about how the First Amendment was being violated, and that's when I realized these people, they're absolutely right. The FCC, or Federal Communications Commission, may be called independent, but it is, in fact, a government office responsible for overseeing various forms of communication like radio and television and cable. Now, despite the limitations set forth by the Constitution, the federal government seems to think it can regulate anything it pleases, including the sounds in the air. And why shouldn't they? Congress, you remember them. They include the House of Representatives. Yeah, our state representatives, who are supposed to be protecting the autonomy of our states by holding the federal government accountable to the limitations of the Constitution. Yeah, those are the people who empowered the FCC in the first place. Look, I'm personally all for morality in society, and I wish more people would choose to live by a stronger ethical code. But that's their choice to make. Just as we all have a choice to change a channel or walk away when we hear or see something we find offensive. The free market regulates itself in these instances based on what the people want to see or hear. The federal government simply has no authority under the Constitution to regulate morality in our communications. In fact, it's strictly prohibited from it. So let's be clear. The government can't stop me from burning an American flag in a street, but it can stop me from saying the S word on the radio because that's a bodily function. The federal government can ban words and phrases based on whether or not they find them socially acceptable. Well, how long do you think it'll be before other things are deemed immoral? Say, speaking out against the government, for instance. Now you can discover more truths about federalism at thefederalistcoalition.org. This is Don on the Air. Well, it finally happened. My youngest has a transgender in his classroom. Yeah, at 7 years old, a child apparently has the mental capacity to make life-altering decisions. You know, despite being like 18 years away from a fully developed brain. What's 18 years of growth and cognitive development anyway? Who cares about logic when we have all of this emotion to make us feel oh so good, so warm and cuddly, and happy, always so happy. Oh, sorry. I was getting swept up in the delirium. I can suddenly see why the feels are so appealing. Welcome back to Don on the Air. No, I don't care much about the way people live, as long as they don't infringe on my rights or thrust themselves into my life. That's why I choose not to care how other people live. Sure, I have opinions. I opened up with a doozy, as a matter of fact. But I don't want to impose my opinions on others in a way that leads toward infringing upon their rights. You know what I mean? It's like how I see things two different ways, I have my personal views, and I have my big picture views. And when it comes to politics, I tend to promote the big picture view because, in my mind, the big picture is ultimately more important. In other words, I can set aside how I personally feel about something if I felt doing something else would be better for the country. Immigration, for instance. I'm not a big fan of illegal immigration. And I think it's awful that our governments pay for as much as they do. But when you add on the extra burden of people living in the shadows, avoiding the system, it just becomes too much. I have to live above board and I have to follow the laws and, well, then so does everyone else. But then, I also support working something out for the dreamers. Now, I only use that label because, people know exactly who I'm talking about. It's those kids that were brought here prior to a specific cutoff date, who have assimilated with our culture and who otherwise would be productive members of our society. These are the people that we actually want here. I say, let them stay and just stick them at the back of the line for true citizenship. Now, sure, it's a little more complex than that, but, my point is that my big picture views can differ from my personal views. And the big picture views are usually the ones that I promote. Now, that's not to say I won't discuss my opinions, because, after all, this is Don on the Air, and I'm just saying, I know the world is greater than I am. I kind of feel as though if everyone else felt and behaved that way, we'd have a much more enjoyable time here together. But that's why I really don't care much about what other people do, Don't infringe upon my rights or the rights of others. What was that Pantera line? Be yourself, by yourself, stay away from me. That's the gist. Just, using all four knuckles. Now, that's not good enough for some folks. And that's when we have a problem. Because, you see, I was different, too. I was living on the edge of society. I was doing my own thing and telling the rest of the world to just deal with it. But what I wasn't trying to do was force the world to accept me. That's the difference. For all my faults, especially when it came to love or valuing myself, I still had enough confidence to not give a damn if the world embraced me. Or at least I had enough respect, not to expect the world to bend to me. All I'm saying is, if you're an adult who was born a male and you want to be, or well, even if you personally believe you're a female, so what? Then be a female. Just don't expect people to treat you differently. And that's what this is all about, isn't it? I mean, if you really think about it, if we break it down to its roots, transgenders just want to be transgender and not be judged for it. But, what I want to know is, what the hell makes you so special? I mean, we all get judged everywhere we go. People are sizing you up. They're judging your toughness, your attractiveness, your gullibility, your chest size, your butt width, and yes, ladies, even your Adam's apple. I mean, come on. If that's not obvious enough for you, then how about, how people judge your job or your income or your car or your home? I mean, we're all being judged by practically everyone who sees us. So get over the self-esteem crap. You're already walking around and interacting with society as a member of the opposite sex. I mean, you've obviously got the something. I mean, it takes a lot of confidence to walk around in this world in a way that goes against the grain. Now, trust me, that much I know, even if you don't realize it yet. But no, you're not special, and no, you don't deserve special treatment. You get judged by everyone's personal little scale, just like the rest of us. Now, also, just like the rest of us, if you don't like how you're viewed, you can either change or, at the very least, conform at the right times, or you could even continue to just be yourself and not let what others think or say bother you. And as more people witness your courage, then they'll come out of their shell, and eventually everyone will just relax. But what you cannot do is force people to accept you. You cannot legislate judgment. When you do that, you oppress people, and oppressed people, as you well know, do not respond well to being oppressed. Everything takes time, and people must accept things on their own. The more you force it, the more they resist. Now, the fun thing is, I probably have 0 transgenders listening to my show right now, and here I am spelling out the realities for them. Now, I'm sure I've got some listeners who are resisting. No, man, they're strange and weird, and we'll never accept them. Or maybe they're pleading, will you please stop telling them how it all works? And others, who might be thinking, well, you're a closet gender traitor sent to infiltrate and destroy us all. And, others still who believe, preach it, brother, and probably even more saying, I'm bored. I'm going to go put in Fallout 4. I mean, you know what all these people have in common? They're all judgy. You know what else? I'll lead by example. I won't care. People can live their lives however they want, as long as they don't infringe on the rights of others. That goes for people, who choose to live outside of societal norms. Now, I know, transgenders say it's not a choice. Well, guess what? It's a choice if I even wear clothes at all. How do you like them apples? Oh, probably a poor turn of phrase there, but anyway, for most of this, I've been referring to adults. When we circle it back around to my original comment, children shouldn't have as much of a say. Now, I can hear the collective whine now. Fascist! Well, here's the thing. If one of my boys decided that he wanted to dress like a girl, I likely would not allow it. Now, we'd have a serious, logical discussion about it, but in the end, I'd probably prohibit it. And it's not that I'm being oppressive. It's more like, well, I'm a responsible parent, I'm responsible for training my children to coexist and, with luck, thrive in our society. And I understand kids. Sometimes they cave to fads or other pressures. Sometimes they go through quirky trends. Other times they can seem more wise than we'll ever realize. The point is, they shift and change as they grow, and it certainly isn't just their bodies. Their thoughts, their opinions, and their beliefs all change as well. Now, the problem is that certain things, especially in today's age, are far more permanent than they ever were when, say, I was a kid. With cameras everywhere and an internet putting it all on public display, seemingly for all time, stigmas, they may never go away. There aren't that many pictures of me from my teens and my 20s. I kind of regret that now because I'd like to look back on that era myself from time to time. But I'm the one who went out of the way to prevent an abundance of photos. I don't know. Look, part of it was personal. Like at times, I felt I had so little self-worth, and I rebelled so hard against life that I didn't even want to leave a record of myself having existed. Other times I jokingly called it evidence. Either way, most of my nostalgia, it's all up in my head. And while I wouldn't mind having a few more pictures of myself from back then, at least I can rest reasonably easy that there aren't likely many, if any, embarrassing photos or videos that survive from back in the day. The same would not be true of pretty much anyone these days. It seems as though everything is recorded and filed away somewhere. At the very least, the potential is there. But the point is, images may last forever now. And when you embrace a fad or a way of life, or even accept a new you and later decide, maybe that wasn't quite for me after all, you'll still be locked into that personal image. At least on some level. So you see, I also believe it's the job of a parent to protect our children. And sometimes, oftentimes, we have to protect them from themselves. They often don't have the mental clarity or the foresight to realize how something they do today can irreparably harm them at some unforeseen point in the future. For children, I see it like this. Okay, look, if you're so sure of yourself and your beliefs, and you're so convinced that something is true, then guess what? It'll still be true when you're an adult, right? If you think you and your girl or boyfriend are gonna be together forever and a day, and you can't wait to get married and get on with life because you're in love and that's all that matters, well, then that'll still be true when you're grown up. If you truly believe that you're the opposite gender or a combination of genders, or even if you believe you have no gender at all, the same will be true once your brain has finished developing, or at the very least, once you become a legal adult, and then, can move out. Believe it or not, I'm actually being supportive. It's just that, I'm not my children's friend or peer. I'm their parent, and I have responsibilities, not only to them, but also to society. And now I have to explain all of this to my 7-year-old. Fortunately, I'm prepared because the evolution of his friend was a long time coming. They've been friends and classmates since kindergarten. This kid started out wearing hair barrettes and lacy socks, and next year moved on to glossy lips and glitter and a sparkly hairband. This year, it was a full-on skirt. Now, you're darn right that I'm being judgy. If you break it down, that's actually the root of my job here, is to be judgy. But I'm judging the parents, not the child. This child is going to be locked into this role forever. In a way, his parents are removing his choice by giving him too much choice now. If later he realizes he is in fact a boy and tries to live a straight life, then chances are his trans past will come back to haunt him. Now, whether that should or shouldn't be is an entirely different debate, but this is what I mean by protecting children from themselves. He may end up one day trying to explain it away as just being a confused youth, or even blaming it all on his parents. And who's to say it isn't the parents' fault? Who knows if this was even his choice at all? It's possible that he never knew any different. Maybe mommy was so desperate for a girl that, she always just treated him like a girl. That's not the kid's choice, is it? It's conditioning. The choices come later, once he's an adult. But how will that stigma of his youth affect him in the future? Well, I guess he'll find out. Oh, and I have no problem calling transgenders by their chosen pronoun if it's obvious, like he or she. When it gets absurdly complicated, that's where I consider them forcing it on me. If you appear to be a woman, I'll call you a she. If you appear to be a man, I'll call you a he. If you want to be called a Z or a they or a snuffleupagus, well, that's on you. Look, do me a little favor here. If you decide to wear a name tag everywhere with your chosen pronoun and all of that, for the love of all things, don't wear it on your chest. Society has spent decades trying to condition men to stop looking at ladies' chests. I'm up here. But my 7-year-old, he has a fairly healthy attitude about most controversial issues. To him, we're not black or white. We're peach and brown. I know, it's essentially the same thing, but he struggles to be accurate, and it's cute. he feels the same way about his friend, too. He wants his friend to make sense, and, well, to him, and to most of us, a boy wearing a girl's clothing just doesn't make that much sense. Now, the thing of it is, I'm not going to teach my kids to hate. And, my son, he felt as though a boy dressing like a girl was kind of breaking the rules. Now, he didn't say anything rude to his friend per se, but, he expressed his confusion, and his friend responded pretty well. My son essentially just accepted that his friend just feels like a girl, and he just let it go, until he came home and asked us about it. And then my wife, she handled it really well. She explained that sometimes boys or girls, they decide they aren't like other boys and girls and end up doing their own thing. That doesn't make it wrong for them. It just makes it different for us. And I reinforced all of that with, even though it's different, that doesn't mean that you can give them a hard time or anything. They were friends before all of this, and if their friendship meant anything, they'd stay friends afterward. And my son, he seemed to get it pretty well. And he essentially replied with, well, that's weird, but okay. Fair enough, right? Isn't that the very essence of acceptance? I may not like it, but you're not hurting me or others, so whatever. Now, I'm sure there are folks out there right now accusing me of hate crimes for teaching my child it's okay to accept someone else while still thinking they're wrong. In this life of free will, that's really the best you can hope for. But here's the thing. Should all of this be allowed in government schools? Sure, it seems like an odd question. After all, there's this idea that children surrender their natural rights when they enter the school grounds. Even though expression can be considered speech and clothing can be a form of expression, government schools, well, they still have dress codes and other rules that limit a student's means of expressing themselves. Now, I'm not entirely convinced this is constitutional. After all, there are no provisions within the Constitution that defines a specific point in time when the Constitution protects natural rights, like speech. In other words, it doesn't say, so long as the citizen is not a minor child under the legal age of consent, and there's no portion that states, so long as the citizen is not on the property of a public school. All it really says on the subject is, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Well, what does abridge mean? It means to curtail. What does curtail mean? Well, it means to lessen or impose a restriction on. Therefore, Congress may not place restrictions on the freedom of speech. Now, the Supreme Court decided that states share the same limitations as the federal government, and, when it comes to the Bill of Rights. And given the nature of our natural rights, the rights that can neither be given nor taken away without due process of law, it makes sense that our federal and state governments, or any arm or branch thereof, it just makes sense that they cannot legally infringe on our natural rights without due process of law. The Supreme Court, in the case of Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District, well, the Supreme Court says that schools do not have the right to restrict the constitutional rights of students. Unless the result of an action would be a major disruption to the classroom learning environment. Of course, the administrators would have to prove a constitutionally viable reason for the prohibition. And still, I can't find that portion in the Constitution either, but my argument would then be, if students can't wear short skirts, torn clothing, t-shirts with profanity, and in some cases political messages because those are all considered too distracting, then how is it that a male dressing as a female or vice versa, how is that not distracting? For kids, I'm sure it's quite distracting. Again, it's not my goal to be oppressive. Even the Supreme Court, well, look, I'm not big on using the Supreme Court as a basis for establishing law, okay? I believe the Supreme Court is more or less a Band-Aid when it comes to constitutional issues. They offer judgments based on opinion that guide our society as individual issues arise. These opinions are not intended to be the final word on any issue. If they were, the Supreme Court would be the supreme law of the land, not the Constitution. We can use the Supreme Court decisions to help guide us, but we need to address permanent change within the Constitution with the constitutional process. Anyway, the Supreme Court declared the First Amendment applicable to public schools. They said, "It can hardly be argued that either students or teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate." Now, for me personally, I just prefer consistency and continuity. In other words, I like things to make sense. Now, another consideration is that religious garments may not be banned. After all, that would interfere with the freedom of religion. But gender identity, that's not a religion. I mean, not in the traditional sense anyway. Personally, I don't think it should be prohibited by a school or a government. Again, I always lean on the side of liberty when supported by the Constitution. Once we allowed expression to be considered speech, which was not exactly my idea, by the way, that opened the door for darn near anything. Like, to some folks, wearing short skirts or skimpy clothing is expression. I mean, sure, it's an expression of sexuality, and, well, I suppose children aren't exactly allowed to express themselves sexually, But then again, homosexuality is based on expressing sexuality, is it not? I mean, the key point of homosexuality is who you have sex with. So if children expressing themselves sexually is disallowed, then why is homosexuality allowed? Well, of course, that's a rhetorical question. I mean, I'd prefer our children not have to deal with sexual situations at all, hetero or homo or anything in between. Life is just too complex for undeveloped minds. Hell, man, life is too complex for fully developed minds sometimes. I mean, how are we supposed to expect children, often with, less than half of the life experience of adults, to understand the implications of sexual choices? I mean, are you starting to see how sexualizing children is simply beyond reason? No? I'm not surprised. I mean, if you didn't realize from the beginning that sexualizing children is wrong, then my telling you now isn't going to change your mind. And no, I'm not suggesting that we shelter children from knowledge of sexuality or sexual issues. I'm saying we shouldn't indoctrinate our children with sex. I can teach my children about drugs, for instance, without encouraging their use. Well, something I need to do real quick is find the first door down the hall on the left. So I'm going to take a short break, and then, we'll get into similar issues about schools and student behavior. And if there's time, we'll see how it all relates to more insidious forms of self-promotion, race hustling, when Dawn on the Air returns in just a moment.
My name is Taylor Fisher, and this is the American Foundation. Federalist Number 1 by Alexander Hamilton. Among the most formidable of the obstacles which the new Constitution will have to encounter may readily be distinguished the obvious interest of a certain class of men in every state to resist all changes which may hazard a diminution of the power, emolument, and consequence of the offices they hold under the state establishments. In Federalist Number 1, Alexander Hamilton is stating the obvious. People in power want to stay in power. Those who held the power under the Articles of Confederation, specifically state legislatures, would not give it up easy to pass the Constitution. Today we see the same problems in the federal government. Any attempt to rein it in brings with it threats of government shutdown and the cancellation of Bert and Ernie. Don't buy into the lies. Remember, that government which governs best governs least. This has been the American Foundation, brought to you by FederalistCoalition.org.
This is Dawn on the Air. Man, I hope the day will come when people no longer have to ask, why can't we be friends? For right now, the answer is kind of obvious. We can't all be friends because people are spending way too much time and money and energy trying to make sure that we aren't friends. And that's not me, of course. I point out our shortcomings in the hopes that, we'll overcome them together. Hi. Welcome back to Dawn on the Air. Excuse me. Someone just asked me, you claim to support liberty and freedom, so why do you bag on other people's choices? Well, you see, you kind of said it yourself, didn't you? I'm questioning their choices, not their right or ability to make their choice. Except, in the case of children. I mean, when they're older, they can make their own decisions. The point is, I have no interest in legislation either way. You can't legislate acceptance. Even if you could, you shouldn't. We have free will for a reason. But now this all leads into, another issue that's still raging like a California wildfire is this absurd NFL kneeler controversy. I call it a controversy because it's fake, manufactured. So now the kneeling is just about good old-fashioned generic racial inequality. Because it makes sense for non-whites to complain about racial inequality in a sport dominated by non-white athletes making more money in a week than most people make in a year. Yeah, now I'm starting to feel oppressed. Well, a couple of weeks ago, President Trump announced his opinion that those players who kneel for the national anthem should be fired. Well, it was a fairly straightforward opinion. I mean, surely the president is allowed to have an opinion without it instantly becoming public policy, right? I mean, I get that the president's opinion may be expected to carry weight, but I also get that some folks might have perceived his comments to be, some sort of a secret message. Now, as a messenger myself, I do understand. So most of the NFL sent a message back in response. They locked arms during the national anthem as a symbol of solidarity. It was more of a, how dare you tell us how to conduct our business kind of protest than being about racial inequality or any kind of anti-American stance, I mean, that's how I took it anyway. Now, look, I apologize for not mentioning all of this, when it happened. On that Monday, I didn't realize the extent of the locked arms protest. I mean, I stopped watching the NFL in 2016, by the second or third time Kaepernick knelt in protest of the national anthem and others started joining him. I knew it was nonsense, and I was tired of sports turning political. Now, I admit, having been a fairly lifelong Falcons fan, I did watch the Super Bowl. And of course, by the end, I felt dirty and full of guilt, and that won't happen again. But at any rate, the problem that I saw with the NFL protesting Trump is that, the players who previously didn't kneel or weren't allowed to kneel suddenly took an opportunity to do just that. And, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think they have every right to kneel. It aggravates me, actually, when I hear people say that players have no right to protest. I mean, their employers decide if they have the right to protest. In fact, the First Amendment just means that the government can't make laws prohibiting them from protesting. I mean, the government can't force them to stand at attention for any reason. And I still don't think they should. I think it's up to the owners and the NFL as a whole to decide how to handle the employment of their players. But the crazy thing about all of this is that it's still a controversy. I mean, there's nothing anyone can do about it, nor should there be. I mean, you can stop watching the NFL and stop buying their swag and then ignore them. I mean, when we keep the controversy alive, we help promote the cause further. If negative publicity wasn't good publicity, we likely would not even have a President Trump right now. Just stop being customers. I did. And no, it's not a boycott. It's the free market. But you see, the real problem that I see with all of this is the intentional instigation of racial unrest. In other words, it's just another form of race hustling. The sad fact is they believed that they could remove the national anthem if they brought attention to it. That failed. They still had these athletes from all across the country kneeling, from the NFL on down to the high school levels. And that was a lot of attention they did not want to go to waste. I mean, that's why they kept cycling causes until they found one that stuck. The fact that the controversy trickled down to the high school level is our next stop on our tour of government schools, the Constitution, and expression. You see, the thing we must remember about unconstitutional issues that are accepted as conventional wisdom because our society embraces it, well, we need to remember that we as a society, when we ignore the Constitution, it signals to the politicians that we don't care as much about, defending our rights and limiting governments as we should. Now, I personally agree with conventional wisdom here and there, but even when I do agree, that doesn't make it right. We should still allow the Constitution to properly limit government as intended, or else no one else will. So when the high school students started kneeling for the flag, of course I found it distasteful. Of course I found it unpatriotic. But keep in mind, students have constitutional rights, and they can protest so long as they're not disrupting the learning process. That's not my limitation. Remember the Supreme Court in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District? That case was about this exact point. I'd argue the kneelers have more right to kneel during the national anthem than students had the right to wear black armbands during class. To me, the black armbands would have caused a distraction from learning because they were being worn during class. Now, look, I understand that many of you will want to burn me at the stake for my next statement. But football is called an extracurricular activity for a reason. It's an activity. I do understand that there are things to be learned from team sports, including football, excellent life lessons and whatnot. It's just not academic. Now, we can play that game where, we want to call football academic, and if that's the case, then fine. Then the football program itself needs to adhere to every single other school rule, which would include no personal contact. And while we're at it, why don't we look at the length of cheerleading skirts? I'm pretty sure that they don't conform to most school policies. And you see, that's why you'll often hear me say that life is simple. It's the people who make it complicated. It doesn't need to be this complicated. So yeah, I would defend a student's constitutionally protected right to kneel during the national anthem, if that's their choice. Now, in case what I'm doing confuses anyone, this is what accountability looks like. You see, I'm holding my government accountable to the Constitution. And I'm reminding our citizenry why we must all hold our governments accountable to the Constitution. That's what all this is. So stop letting your own personal whim dictate whether our politicians support and defend the Constitution. I don't like the kneeling, but the last thing I want is to offer our government, or any armed branch or faction thereof, a perceived authority to decide whose speech is protected. Now, if you really want to be up in arms about the kneelers, then just keep yourself focused where it counts, on the NFL. Because I wasn't being facetious when I said kneeling has become a form of race hustling. Now, a race hustler, in case you don't know, is someone who stokes the flames of racial tension, often exploiting circumstances for their own benefit. Now, there are many types of race hustlers, and they're not always as obvious. Since it's on topic, I'll begin with an organization, like the NFL. The kneeling issue began as exploiting a racial tension that never really existed, the national anthem. When it didn't take off as intended, they kept trying racially motivated issues until they found one that stuck, generic racial inequality. They consciously chose a divisive way to get attention and then used that attention to espouse whatever racially motivated issue they could find. That's race hustling. Now, what does the NFL gain? Well, it's highly profitable to be anti-Trump right now. So much so, people went above and beyond to praise the shooter in Las Vegas for likely targeting Trump supporters. Now, it's true the NFL stands to lose a lot of business, but I'd wager the NFL thinks of itself as too big to fail. I mean, why not? They managed to operate as a non-profit, along with all the perks, for nearly 50 years. They've clearly got friends with a lot of influence somewhere. But then there's also Planned Parenthood, race hustlers indeed. Founded by Margaret Sanger, notorious for founding the concept of birth control, which, she used as a form of racial control. Opening clinics in impoverished neighborhoods, Sanger sought to rid the world of children she considered to be born of ignorance or accidents, in order to build a foundation for a new race. Her words, not mine. Planned Parenthood still operates more than 600 clinics throughout the United States. It's truly scary stuff. Black Lives Matters, of course, is race hustling. The sad thing is, the leaders of this organization, they like to feed off of racial disharmony. I mean, would anyone know who D. Ray McKesson is, for instance, if not for the murder of police officers inspired by Black Lives Matters? Actually, if you take a look at their website, much of their propaganda is semi-violent and definitely anti-state. Now, the problem with that is, there's always a government. Using phrases like anti-state, well, it implies you'd prefer a centralized government. Again, there's always a government. Even if society collapsed tomorrow and we all split off into splinter groups, every group would technically be a government. Now, groups like this, they praise socialism. I mean, have you ever heard of the Democratic Socialists of America? If not, you will. They opened up shop here in Atlanta and, have not stopped feeding on ignorance and the disillusionment of the black community ever since. Now, I addressed socialism a couple of weeks ago, but the gist is that socialism is just the selling point to communism. In other words, socialism is the tool used to convince the average citizen to surrender all their rights to the government, therefore ushering in communism. Socialism works because they convince people that freedom and liberty are skewed and unavailable to everyone equally. So the force of government is necessary, to ensure equality. Now, the government doesn't create wealth. It can only steal it. So the government will steal the wealth from those who have it. Now, they don't disperse the confiscated funds and products equally. The government dispenses goods and services at their leisure. So you see, it's true that we would all become equally poor. At any rate, this is race hustling. They're essentially saying, you're not smart enough, capable enough, nor clever enough to have what the white man has. So you need us to govern on your behalf and ensure that we take from those smarter, more capable, or more clever than you, so everyone can be equal. Now, I'm still trying to understand why people continuously fall for this hustle. I mean, aside from the sense of hopelessness, that is. The hopelessness pushed on these folks, from birth, by their communities, their parents, their peers, their entertainers. I mean, all falsely confirmed by the biased media who feeds off of disharmony. I mean, could you imagine what the media would be like in a world that thrived in peaceful harmony? There likely wouldn't be much of a news media, and they know it. Oh, the media, man. Here's a great example. In late September, the Huff and Puff Post released an article by Jesse Benn entitled, "White Athletes Still Standing for the Anthem Are Standing for White Supremacy." Yes, that is a for real, actual headline. Now, the author, he was trying to convince the idea that American ideas such as freedom and the American dream and all of that are only available to white people. So if people are kneeling during the national anthem to protest racial inequality and others decide not to join in that protest, then those who stand by default support oppression. And since most of those people are white, they might not even know that they're doing it. Now, look, I do get what he's saying here, but let's be real. The kneeling is an artificial controversy. It's only as meaningful as the cause it stands for remains relevant. Likewise, the arguments the kneelers are disrespecting America and our soldiers by peacefully protesting are equally absurd. I mean, this is precisely why we have the First Amendment. I don't have to like it, but you have a right to say it, and I have a right to disagree. Life goes on. Why do I have to keep reminding people of this, especially the people who are so fond of saying it? I mean, does it only apply when we're speaking about hypothetical situations? I don't think so. I mean, to me, it's a real principle that's valid for any constitutionally protected speech. At the same time, everyone has opportunity in today's America. The majority of someone's success depends on their outlook. When people are fed defeatism most of their lives, and then the propaganda is reinforced through entertainment and the media, the lie becomes ingrained in the human psyche. This type of race hustling is designed to keep minorities in their place through self-defeatism. And there's quite a bit of that going on. I mean, think about it. When you're told society has no place for you, when your family and your peers and your community tell you society has no place for you, your music, movies, and television all tell you society has no place for you. And this is what you're going to grow up hearing, you know? This is what you hear your entire life. Then every time you try something and fail, guess what? It's because society has no place for you. Of course, that's not the truth, but that's the way people perceive their predicaments, because that's how they were trained. I mean, there's a reason why I'm so harsh with race hustlers, you know? They're despicable cretins feeding off the darkest, most deeply rooted divisions in our history. I mean, that's the reason I've been so dead set against this kneeling controversy. It's why I'm practically zeroed in on folks, you know, whether they be individuals, organizations, or even politicians who will push this hatred in the name of peace, you know, for the purpose of keeping us divided. You know, even though I'm not a fan of the particular song choice of our national anthem, I'll still stand for it. But what I won't stand for is when folks push racial disharmony to keep us divided. No, because again, united we stand, divided we fall. It really is that simple. Stop making it complicated. You know, it's weird. I mean, having to watch what I say or how I say it because I'm white. I mean, maybe that's a hint as to what racial oppression feels like. But the difference, though, is that the race hustlers, they oppress themselves and those around them with negativity of living in the past. Then, you know, they want others to suffer right now the same way their ancestors suffered. Because to them, that is equality. Well, let me tell you something. Oppression doesn't bring equality. It just brings more oppression. That is, of course, unless your goal is to make everyone equally oppressed. And given the resurgence of socialism, I wouldn't be too surprised. There'll be more Dawn on the Air in just a moment.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
This is Dawn on the Air. Man, you know, I might need the time to be tick-tick-ticking in my head just a little bit more often, because the thrashing of the anthrax reminds me I'm slap out of time. Look, thank you all for listening. I mean, if you like Dawn on the Air, or if you just want to form a Dawn off the Air hate group, be my guest. Tell your friends, your families, your enemies. Hey, tell that bum on the street, you know, because he probably still has an Obama phone that, you know, he can love to hate me with. Just, let me know at Dawn on the Air on Twitter or by email, dawnontheair@klrnradio.com. In a few weeks, I'll mention some of the feedback and we can have a conversation. But coming up next is the rambunctious Rick Robinson with America Off the Rails. I'll be listening and chatting in the KLRNradio.com chat room. You should join me. But for now, I'll see you folks here next week, Monday, 10 p.m. Eastern. Right here on KLRNradio.com. Until then, just remember, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not a polite suggestion. The people who swear their oaths to support and defend the Constitution ought to remember that, or else we need to remind them, in no uncertain terms, at the voting booth. You know, while we still can.